Okay, today we're going to work on page 37, radical equations. It's 11.3. There's really nothing to write notes on about page 37, but I'm just going to go over what it says. So a radical equation is an equation that has a variable underneath the radical. So the square root of x plus 3 equals 5 would be considered a radical equation because there's a variable underneath the radical. However, the square root of 3 plus x equals 5 would not be a radical equation because there's no variable underneath the radical. Okay, now to solve radical equations, so here, I'll give you an example. Root x plus 4 equals 7. Well, I think your instinct would be to isolate the variable, and that's exactly right. So even though the variable is under a radical, our first step is to isolate the variable. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides, and I get root x equals 3. Now, this says the square root of x equals 3. I want to undo square rooting, so I have just an x. Well, how do we undo square rooting? We undo square rooting by squaring. So when I square a square root, it ends up just being what's underneath the radical sign. But if I square the left-hand side, I have to square the right-hand side. So I end up with an answer, x equals 9. Okay, so what did I do? I isolated the variable, I isolated the radical, and then I squared both sides. Now, if I plug this back in, is the square root of 9 3? Yes. Now, some of you may say, well, no, but the square root of 9 could be plus or minus 3. Now, this is the tricky part. If I'm the one that writes the square root, so if I say to you, what's the square root of 9? I'm just looking for the positive square root. Okay? Now, if I wrote this, then I'm looking for the negative square root. So the opposite square root of 9 would be negative 3. Sometimes you'll see this, and that means they're looking for both square roots, plus or minus 3. Now, this is if the square root is already written for you. If you decide to square root both sides, you have to find both square roots, okay? But let's look at B. The square root of x plus 3 plus 5 equals 9. First, I isolate the square root. I get the square root of x plus 3 equals 4. I want to get rid of the square root, so I square this side. That and that cancel out. I have to square this side. I get x plus 3 equals 16. Minus 3, x equals 13. Okay, so let's turn the page. And we look at the steps to solving a radical equation. Step number 1, isolate the radical. Step 2, once the radical is isolated, square both sides. Step 3, simplify and solve. Now, step 4 is something we have not done. You should check all solutions. Some will be extraneous. Now, what does that mean? I'm going to go over what an extraneous solution is. Okay, so here, if I say to you, what could x be that when you take a square root of it, you get negative 4? Now, some of you would think, oh, x could be 16 because we know the square root of 16 is plus or minus 4. But that's wrong. If I wanted to know both the positive and negative square root, I would put that there. So this particular equation is saying, what is the principal or the positive square root of x? Well, a positive square root can never be a negative number, so this would be a no solution. And because of that, you can get extraneous solutions, because let's just pretend we solved this like I told you to. We square this, we square this, we get x equals 16. But then when I say what's the principal square root of 16, it's 4, which does not equal -4. So because of this possibility, we can end up with what are called extraneous solutions. So I want you to try number 1, 2, and 3 on page 38. Stop the video, do them, and when you're done, play the video, and I'll go over them. Okay, so this says 3 plus root m equals 13. I subtract 3 from both sides. Whoops. And I get the square root of m equals 10. Now I square both sides, and I get m equals 100. So now I check 3 plus the square root of 100, principal square root or positive square root. So 3 plus 10, does that equal 13? Yes, it does, and it works. Okay? So, number 2. The square root of 4m plus 1 minus 5 equals 0. I add 5 to both sides. 4m plus 1 equals 5. I square both sides. I get 4m plus 1 equals 25. 4m equals 24, m equals 6. So let's check. Is the square root of 4 times 6 plus 1 minus 5 equal to 0? And this becomes a positive square root of 25 is 5, and 5 minus 5 equals 0. Check, so it works. Okay, and number 3, I get the square root of 6m minus 3 equals 3. I square both sides. I get 6m minus 3 equals 9. 6m equals 12. M equals 2. Check it out. 6 times 2 minus 3 equals 0. That's square root of 9. Positive square root of 9 is 3. 3 minus 3 equals 0. And that works. Okay? So, again, to solve an equation, a radical equation, you isolate the radical, square both sides, and then solve. But you still have to check your answers in case you get an extraneous solution. Now, I'm going to give you one more to do. Square root of 3x minus 5 equals x minus 5. Okay? Now, the first thing I do is square both sides. Let me show you the number 1 mistake. So see if you can tell me what I'm doing wrong, because I'm going to do something wrong. Okay, did you catch it? What did I do wrong? I hope you're all screaming at the screen saying, but Mrs. Chemris, x minus 5 squared is not and never will be x squared minus 25. And you would be correct, because x minus 5 times x minus 5 means we have to FOIL. And that becomes x squared minus 5x minus 5x minus 10x plus 25. So be careful of that, because that's the number 1 mistake. Now, I see an x squared term, so I know I'm going to have to set this all equal to 0. So I'm going to say 0 equals x squared minus 13x plus 30. Okay? Now, I'm going to factor this. 0 equals x minus 15x. Oh, that's not going to work. I was going to do negative 15 and positive 2, but that wouldn't give me a positive 30. So my numbers are going to be negative 10 and negative 3. Because negative 10 times negative 3 is positive 30. Negative 10 plus negative 3 is negative 13. So now I end up with two answers, x equals 10, x equals 3. But remember, we're not done. I have to go back to my original equation and plug it in. So let's plug in 10. The square root of 3 times 10 minus 5 equals 10 minus 5. So this becomes the square root of 25 equals 5, and the principal square root of 25 is 5, so 10 works. Okay, let's try 3. The square root of 3 times 3 minus 5 equals 3 minus 5. So this becomes the square root of 4 equals negative 2. But the positive square root of 4 is 2. 2 does not equal negative 2. So that means this 3 is extraneous and does not work. So my only answer is 10. Okay, so remember, you do have to check those extraneous answers. Checking does not mean you're checking to see if you made a mistake. Checking means you're checking to see if there is an extraneous answer. Okay, so I want everybody to turn to page 40. You're going to do example 3. And then you're going to do checkpoint number 4. And checkpoint number 5. Okay, so stop the video and do this on your own. And when you're done, start the video and see if you got the right answer. Okay, so for this one, x equals the square root of 2x plus 15. I'm going to square this and square this. I get x squared equals 2x plus 5. X squared minus 2x minus, that should be a 15, sorry, minus 15 equals 0. And I'm going to factor this. I get x minus 5, x minus 3 equals 0, x equals 5, x equals 3. And then I have to check it in, plug it back in to see if it works. Okay, so let's get rid of this. So if I plug in a 5, 2 times 5 is 10. 10 plus 15 is 25. The square root of 25 is 5, so 5 equals 5. If I plug in the 3, 2 times 3 is... Okay, I hope you're all screaming at the screen because this is supposed to be plus 3 and this is minus 3. So, sorry about that. So your answer you should have gotten is 5 and negative 3. When we plug negative 3 back in, 2 times negative 3 is negative 6, plus 15 is 9, and we end up with a situation where negative 3 does not equal positive 3. So this is an extraneous solution. Okay? Now, let's look at number 4. For number 4, I square both sides. I get 20 minus x equals x squared. X squared plus x minus 20 equals 0. X plus 4, x plus 5, x minus 4 equals 0. X equals negative 5, comma 4. And if you plug negative 5 back in, it does not work. So that is extraneous. For this one, I square both sides. I get y plus 2 equals, remember, FOIL this, y squared minus 8y plus 16. So I end up with y squared minus 9y plus 14 equals 0. And that's y minus 7, y minus 2 equals 0. I end up with 2 comma 7. When you plug in the 2, it does not work, and the 2 is extraneous. Okay, so that's the end of the video, and you can now start the work.